Hello and welcome to Rotted Reviews, and today I'm going to be taking a look at the newly released on Amazon Prime movie, the 2021 film, A Haunting in Ravenwood. Now before I begin with this review, I do want to just point out that I have launched a companion channel, Rotted Entertainment. Rotted Reviews is going to be dedicated to nothing but individual movie reviews of mostly horror films. Anything else, lists, rants, recommendations, rankings, all that is going to go over to Rotted Entertainment. So go ahead and look for the pinned comment or the link in the description below. So not too long ago, I reviewed the movie Amityville Poltergeist, directed by 𝗘𝗾𝘂𝗶𝗽𝗺𝗺 McCarthy, and in that review I talked about how I didn't think it was a terrible movie, it was mostly just amateurish, and kind of put right side by side with other Amityville films, it certainly wasn't the bottom of the barrel. And I also mentioned in my review that Calvin, if you're listening, I would love to see what you make next. Please keep going. And sure enough, Calvin did indeed see it and left comments and seemed to be fairly appreciative of the overall honesty and tone, and thank you for that. And sure enough, I also received an email from them very recently talking about A Haunting in Ravenwood. And in this, they say, recently I've started working for Breaking Glass Pictures, making low-budget horror films that they help produce. One of my newer movies, A Haunting in Ravenwood, was just released today and is available on Amazon to rent or buy. This was about a week ago. I wanted to bring this to your attention as I remember you saying that you were interested in seeing what I do next. Sure enough, yep, I did use those words. I did. Calvin goes on to say, I realize that filmmakers in my position usually turn out cynical, brainless cash grabs. Dustin Ferguson with a question mark. Fair point. I hope that if nothing else, you will see my passion for the genre and indie filmmaking. Okay, so I said it, I'm being held to it, and here we go. So in this movie, we follow a newlywed couple that move away from their apartment in the big city and off to the countryside in his large Victorian estate that he owned with his first wife, who unfortunately met a terrible tragedy. Unfortunately, things don't seem to be going exactly right. She is hearing things, seeing things, all sorts of things, which kind of butts heads up against her history of trauma related to her brother's death and the therapy that she's sought ever since. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give a very generic, spoiler-free movie review here. And then I'm going to dive into things a lot deeper. I'm going to really be getting into this with rolling up the sleeves. And this is a situation where I'm really going to try and not become preachy about it. I think that's a trap that I admittedly fall into sometimes, where I am offering advice to the director. If I'm being approached by a filmmaker one-to-one and I'm making a video based on that, then I tend to kind of turn into a little bit of, a browbeater, and I don't want to do that this time around, so yeah, I'm just going to really kind of mind my P's and Q's, but I'm still going to approach things with a fair bit of honesty, and here's the honest thing, is I kind of felt like this wasn't a huge marked improvement from Amityville Poltergeist. There were some improvements. I do feel like this wasn't quite as amateurish, but it was still fairly amateurish. I mean, this is a $1.99 rental on Amazon Prime. This isn't something like $14 that's going to rip anybody off. If somebody wants to kick this on, I'm not going to say anything to dissuade them from doing so. It's simply not really a movie that I can recommend very much. There's just not a whole lot to it. I do have several notes. I don't want to just completely leave that on the floor like a wet turd. I'm going to be getting into some details on what I think could have improved it, the specific elements as far as what I found to be lacking, and potentially some ideas to kind of bolster that in the future. I think some of the improvements that I noticed was better filming style. I noticed that this played with angles more. It had some good shots set up. It would do things like shoot between stair railings or accoutrement attached to the house, things like that, to kind of get some interesting angles and interesting moments and focus points. I liked that. The biggest thing that really needs to get addressed is the character dynamics. And I don't just mean their interaction with one another, I mean their dynamic range, their ability to kind of elevate the script into something that I can care about because I care about them and what they're going through. And that kind of fell apart on several technical levels. The dialogue, as far as what was actually said, what might be on the page, felt fairly stilted, felt very, very stiff. And that wasn't helped at all by the actors' performances of the characters. We've had movies movies hit this channel before, especially even the Amityville movies, where like amityville.𝗃𝗃, that by all rights was pretty terrible, but actually managed to elevate by having some dynamic characters that had some energy and some flow and a very natural feel to them. So it kind of brought me into the film and at least provided something entertaining. Not really so with The Haunting in Ravenwood. John Megison as Eric was extraordinarily stiff, and you could just kind of tell that there was a big level of discomfort there. There was absolutely no range to his performance at all. He went from dour to dourest, and that's about it. But even beyond that, just, not knowing what to do with his hands and kind of defaulting to stuffing them into his coat pocket or pulling on his lapels every few seconds. It's just one of those things. You kind of get the idea that as soon as the cameras were rolling and the focus was on him, it was just more trying to remember lines and trying to feel comfortable, but there wasn't a natural quality there. And that held true for a lot of the actors and their performances in this. So the question kind of becomes, when we have a newlywed couple that's kind of going through these things, how can they possibly have a natural chemistry with each other when they can't even really bring a natural performance on their own? I'm not an acting coach. I don't know what could possibly fix that. Perhaps more table reads, perhaps a lot more rehearsals, perhaps investing a little bit more money into the actual casting. I noticed that this movie, like Amityville Poltergeist, stars Eileen Dietz, and I know that getting an actress or an actor that has some gravitas and some resume history on them can be a bit of a get, and that's an exciting thing, especially for up-and-coming indie filmmakers. We actually got Eileen Dietz or Lynn Shay or Bill Moseley, but the thing of it is, it doesn't do your film any good if it doesn't match the character. And Eileen Dietz plays Mary's therapist who still is in the big city, and there's trying to maintain some sort of connection so that Mary isn't completely floundering on her own. And there's a few things there. First of all, I know it's a cute little callback. I know it's fun. It's, a little bit of fan service to horror film fans. That's great. But there's a difference between having a statue of Pazuzu in all of his erect glory on a bookshelf in the background, fuzziness, with the focal points and so forth, or simply having him prominently featured on the table next to a therapist as they're seriously trying to hold a session. But more than that, on Eileen Dietz's performance on her own, it just didn't feel real. It was almost like walking through mud. It was very slow. I just got the feeling that there was a whole lot of trying to remember lines, and it just felt very, very, very unengaging.
Well, when we experience things that are too difficult or painful, we tend to push them back. You've told Eric the extent of your past trauma?
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's how we met.
Right. Our grief is our strength.
The one thing that it did not feel at all was like a therapist was talking, and that's unfortunate. I think that if it would actually save the money on getting Eileen Dietz in that role and getting that get of a name, I think this movie would have benefited in pulling back from that, not really necessarily relying on the big name get, and simply just getting a therapist to sit in the chair and just have a fun afternoon on their day off, being themselves in kind of a play test environment with this other character that's kind of going through things here. And then maybe, I don't know what the budget was like. I don't know what distribution of the budget was like. I don't know any of this. So I'm really kind of spitballing here. But maybe if that decision had been made, then there might have been a bit more financials in the coffers as far as other talent for the screen. People that perhaps had a bit more experience and weren't so uncomfortable, because these were really, really big roles with a lot of emotional range being asked of them and just really none being provided. Which brings me to kind of another point as far as the characters and what they were going through is we didn't have a good baseline. These were newlyweds at the start of their journey, and yes, they had their history, yes, they had their trauma, but they were going through it together. And you know what I didn't see? Was anybody ever happy? What a horror movie will do to characters and what it'll put them through and the changes that it causes in them by introducing them to these horrific elements and having their personalities abruptly go through things and having the dynamic clashes between them. It helps a whole lot if we understand who they were prior to these moments, prior to these horrific elements. And if we see them happy and they start to change, then we have a little bit of emotional resonance. Then we have engagement. But beyond all of that, I think one of the bigger problems of the characters was the lack of realism. Characters in so many ways can be built up, but until you're actually putting them in a situation and then asking how would they react true to their character in a realistic fashion, it's going to read as false to the audience. And that's exactly what happened here. I mentioned that these characters were never really happy. Outside of Mary simply telling her therapist that she is happy, there didn't seem to be a whole lot of joy there. But Eric was simply just miserable the entire time. This is as close as we ever got to a smile with him.
I love you.
As you should.
So the fact that he very, very outwardly appears miserable at every step, never experiences any joy, moved his new wife into his old wife's house, prevents her from going into rooms, says words like,
Mary, I forbid you to talk about it.
mistreats the simple-minded gardener.
Well, shall we leave you to it? Huh? Huh? What'd you say there, Gregory?
Which, by the way, is a fairly well-worn trope and honestly really shouldn't be there anymore. The whole package, this dude was a complete 150-pound red flag stuffed into a turtleneck and chain, which, by the way, is itself a red flag. So where was Mary's actual reactions to this dour, sad, miserable, abusive excuse for a newlywed husband? It just didn't fit. Like, honestly, the whole situation that Mary found herself in and that Eric shoehorned her into, everything that the characters were going through as far as this plot goes, with this house, with this dynamic, with this, this room that belonged to his first wife that he's holding as some kind of forbidden territory from his new wife, all of it just felt so odd, so weird, and the furthest thing at all from natural. Couple that with the fact that very little actually happened that was very interesting. The surprises and the twists were broadcast well ahead of time. The characters themselves were pretty lackluster and milquetoast with no performances to elevate them. This is why I found A Haunting in Ravenwood to be very lacking in engagement. A lot of this can be fixed fairly inexpensively as far as projects moving forward into the future. As far as the screenplay goes, a lot of that can be fixed as far as taking some courses, reading some books, and learning about the nature of how to develop characters and then how to have those characters surprise you, the writer, because if they're doing that, they're going to surprise the audience, and that is engagement, as well as the idea of potentially investing some more into your cast. And even if it's not money, then it's time, it's effort, it's getting them to go past their audition and actually have some solid rehearsal time, solid table reads, get them in there, have the time spent so that everybody is at very least feeling natural in their own characters. And if you can actually get them to develop a rapport with each other and actually get some character interaction that feels natural as far as any kind of chemistry between them, then awesome. Then you're taking something that even if what's on the page is somewhat mediocre, they will elevate it. So like I said, I did see some improvements between this and Amityville Poltergeist. Some of the effects were a little bit better. Some of the angles and the camera work was better. And the one thing that I will say, if you're watching this, Calvin, and I'm pretty sure you're going to, is I see the passion. I don't see that you are a cash grab, churn them out director like Dustin Ferguson. And again, I am interested in seeing what you do next. I love supporting indie filmmakers and indie films, especially when they're able to listen to honest criticism and take it in the constructive nature that was intended. So I know this one got a little bit long-winded. I'm sorry for that. And I also know that it got into the nitty-gritty. I hope it came across as non-venomous. I really do. But thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please click like and subscribe. And remember, my companion channel, Rotted Entertainment, go ahead and check it out there. I have one video up right now, and there's going to be more to come. So please give it a watch, and if you like what you see there, give it a subscribe. And remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.